The next question we need to ask is whether we want to take a quantitative or a qualitative approach to content analysis, or indeed if we may wish to combine the two. And there are connections between these questions and the issues that we've already been discussing. So, for example, if you're interested in the way that the ideas and images from a particular game cross different media boundaries, cross different media platforms, one of the things that you might be interested in doing is doing some type of content analysis that, for example, enumerates the number of occurrences of references to Minecraft across different forms or any type of game that you might want to talk to. But it's important to know that there's a particular reason why content analysis originated as a form of quantitative research. And the reasons why that happened very much relate to some of the questions you're going to need to think about when you're doing content analysis in the contemporary moment. And the point that I'm going to make is that although you don't need to do quantitative content analysis, you do need to understand why quantitative content analysis became the most widely used tool in early forms of this type of textual research. So, why do we have quantitative content analysis? And when I'm talking about quantitative content analysis, I'm looking at research that typically takes a text or or more often a large body of texts, and looks at the occurrence or recurrence or the absence of certain features. So, for example, one of the examples I like most recently is that people have kind of gone back and trawled through old episodes of Friends and noticed how monocultural that show is. They have counted the numbers of appearances of people of color, for example, and they've found that it's pretty low. They've counted the number of homophobic and transphobic comments, and and uh, and they have found that they're quite common, those sorts of things. So quantitative content analysis typically looks for recurrent features of a particular genre or a particular form or whatever it is, and we can find the logic for this in Harold D. Laswell's book Propaganda Technique in the World War. And although this appears to be an image of a Hitler-like looking figure, this research was actually prompted by World War One propaganda. And what Laswell was keen to do was to promote quantitative content analysis as an important method for identifying recurrent features of particular message systems. And what did he mean by this, and why did he do it? The problem that Laswell was concerned with was that in the post-Great War period, there was a great conviction that propaganda had been hugely successful during the Great War. But Laswell was concerned that that conviction was based on anecdotes and impressions rather than systematic research. That is, that he found that when people were talking about and discussing Great War propaganda, they would quite often talk about particular campaigns they'd seen or particular messages they'd seen that were especially vivid, especially memorable. And Laswell said, well, look, but if we want to talk about the impact of propaganda as a whole, you have to look at the system of propaganda as a whole and talk about what are its recurrent features. What are people seeing again and again and again and again? The danger that concerned Laswell in more qualitative approaches to content analysis was that it makes it very easy to cherry pick an example of a message that represents the argument that the writer has already decided to make. And this isn't a very responsible way of going about doing research. So, what Laswell said you needed to do for quantitative content analysis was you need to define a universe of media texts. You need to collect together a body of content that you want to analyze. You need to explain why that universe represents a valid sample. Why is it that you are choosing to talk about these texts in particular? Why do you think that they represent a coherent message, if you like? And then you need to develop a code book. You need to say, well, what am I going to look for? When I look at these messages, what is it that in particular that I'm looking for? How am I defining the content that I'm looking for? And why am I looking for that content? These are all really, really important questions. And incidentally, those are all questions that carry over into qualitative research as well. And then finally, I need to sit back and dispassionately measure what the recurrent features of those particular message systems are. So we can see that there's great value to these ideas. That content analysis begins from the conviction that it's important that if we're going to talk about media content as a footprint, as a cultural indicator of broader social and cultural messages, it follows that we need to find ways of methodically enumerating and assessing the most common recurrent features of media content that's selected for a particular reason. And that's the logic of doing quantitative content analysis. What is it that people are encountering over and over again? But even if you don't end up doing quantitative content analysis, Laswell's thoughts on the way that you begin to gather information, gather texts, and develop well-defined criteria that's going to guide you in the content analysis that you do, these are important points for all of us to remember.